Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, here in the room, dear guests online via stream. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to today's plenary table organized by Körber Foundation and table briefings, as we just heard. My name is Tim Gable. I'm an editor at Research Table, and from August 2024 until the summer, I reported from Washington, D.C. on development in U.S. science and research policy. So that was during that time we have seen enormous changes under the Trump administration after January the 6th and the attacks on the Ivy League institutions like Harvard or Columbia, budget cuts, political interference, just to name a few of them. So these decisions are putting the very foundations of the American research system at risk, and with effect of the transatlantic relations for sure. The title, as you already mentioned, Matthias, is Bridge Over Troubled Waters, the Future of Transatlantic Relations in Research and Innovation and Beyond. I admit it's a pretty long title, but I think it's a very fitting one. On one side, we have the troubled waters, that's for sure, and on the other, there's still a future that we should actively shape. So we added beyond to the title because the situation in the US is so dynamic that we wanted to keep the discussion open for whatever there comes. I'm especially glad to be back in Germany and in Hamburg today to meet these outstanding experts who will share their perspectives and thoughts with us today. Katrin Amian, to my right, is from the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. She's head of the division for North America, Australia, New Zealand, and Oceania, right? And she oversees the fellowship programs and alumni networks for the foundation in these regions. And she herself has conducted research at leading US universities as well. So welcome, Mrs. Amian. And even nearer is Nicola Fuchs-Schündeln. She's president of the Berlin Social Science Center and professor of macroeconomics and development at the Goethe University Frankfurt. She holds a PhD in economics from Yale and taught as assistant professor at the Harvard University. So there's a lot to talk about to her today. Welcome, Mrs. Fuchs-Schündeln. So today we want to discuss the current situation and turning points in the US science policy and what it means for the future of the transatlantic partnership. We also want to reflect on what we can do from our side to strengthen transatlantic science diplomacy, but also strengthen our science and scientific system. So let me start with a more personal question. You both have spent a while at US institutions, as we just heard. So from a scientist's perspective, what is the greatest benefit of this exchange and what exactly is at stake right now, Ms. Fuchs-Schündeln?
Yeah, thanks first for having me here on the panel. So from a perspective of a science, I think of a scientist, the attraction of working in the US is very much the peers, actually, that you have in these top US universities, an accumulation of knowledge, a group of people who all are really into research, who love to discuss ideas, to think freely, to advance knowledge, to challenge each other. And that is, I think, what made the life as a scientist at a US university so attractive. Part of that is the internationality of the group of the peers, so to have colleagues from all over the world. Right. And I think these are the two challenges that the US universities are now facing. First, internationality becomes much harder now that the visa programs, right, also for exchange students, for scholarly exchange, everything is under threat. And secondly, the free thinking, which is often very provocative, actually, is also under threat because clearly there are cuts to research that goes in certain direction. And I think this limits naturally which kind of ideas get developed or not. And so that I think will stifle the open scientific debates that are so core to the US universities. And then now from a German perspective or from a European perspective, we benefit a lot from that as well, because we have this free exchange of ideas. More and more scholars now are really international, like the two of us, or you spend some time in the US, so you go there, you come back. Science is not national anymore, it is international. I think we have to admit that the US universities are still leading, but the entire science system profits from that. So that's what I also want to stress. It's not only that science in the US is under attack. I think science in itself is under attack if the scientific freedom and the international exchange of scholars gets stifled.
Right. Mrs. Amian.
Yes, I can only underscore that the US for the past decades has always served as a magnet for international talent, and going there and doing research, exploring ideas together with peers from all over the world has always been an opportunity in the United States, which is why very many Germans have the US on their CV, like the two of us here. And there are many challenges which US universities and research institutions face today. I was in the US just until yesterday for a couple of days, and I come back with, of course, concerns that are there. There's much reason for concern, but there are also signs of resilience, and maybe we can also talk about that in our round.
Mm-hmm. So what have you heard? You just mentioned you were in the US, I think in Washington, D.C. To whom did you speak, and what did you hear from them there?
I was there for a board meeting of the American Friends of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. We fund international researchers and provide fellowships for them to come to Germany and research awards. And we have an alumni network of more than 5,000 Humboldtians in the United States across all states, across all disciplines, most of them in leading positions at US institutions. And the American Friends of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation is our partner organization providing services for the community of US alumni. And on the board meeting, we have 16 Humboldtians, and there was a very engaged discussion about the situation. And we, from Germany, as I represent the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, are very much in touch then with our network and trying to understand what's happening. And what I could hear again, and this wasn't the first time this year that I was in the US, is that of course there are many reasons for concern. We all know the funding cuts, attacks on the university, challenges on university campuses about free speech, so many issues that are there. What I found interesting during my visit is also to hear signs of resilience, or to see signs of resilience, because I think here in Germany we sometimes focus on all of the news that's coming across the Atlantic almost daily, that is challenging news, but it's also important to look at the system as a resilient system. And what I could see is that US universities are responding to the attacks. They're doing so in different ways. Harvard's approach is very visible, fighting back, trying to sustain through the legal courts. We see Columbia making deals with the government, so trying a deal-making approach. Many institutions trying to stay off the radar, so trying to find ways in which to continue what they're actually doing, and making up for the loss of funds. And I could speak to advisor to the president of the University of Chicago, saying they had raised $1 billion in a private fundraising campaign to support the university. So there's a lot of resilience too. I also come back with statements from the West Coast saying that here we have a gold rush in AI, so there's a huge potential for young academics to go to the private sector companies working on AI data centers, and these are scholars from the humanities and STEM scientists as well. And there are many opportunities available right now on that side too. So I think there's you have to differentiate a little bit in the picture that we have of the US situation.
So did you hear something about visa restrictions? That was a big topic here and also in the United States. So what did you hear about that?
It is a challenge, and mostly our alumni say the psychological effect of the discussion about that, about the cases that were real cases that were there, creates a situation where international scholars and researchers are hesitant to go to the US. And I'm sure you're all aware of that yourself, that suddenly you start to wonder if it's safe to go to the US, if you'll actually obtain a visa, if your visa might be rejected. And that has had a huge impact. I've heard stories where visas were rejected or during that time of postdocs or international students in the US. And when the universities stood up and hired their lawyers to send out letters and oppose, they were usually successful. So it seems that there were attempts on the system to create fear and instability. And it remains an issue, and at the same time, there's also still potential there. It's possible to get visas, it's possible to get positions in the US. It's not gone away.
Right. So Professor Fuchs-Schündeln, there was a lot discussion about budget cuts, funding cuts in the US. From a social science and economic perspective, what long-term consequences could the reduce of public funding and a potential brain drain that's also in the discussion for science and in general for the society mean?
Yeah, as I stressed before, I think in science, in creating knowledge, we really are dependent of this international exchange. So the more we have open borders, the more we talk to each other, the more we build diverse teams, the better we will advance science. So this stifling per se, that makes it harder to go to the US or makes it less attractive, or maybe people are fearful or not willing even to go. I mean, I know people who say, as a principle, I wouldn't go there now. That will stifle science. From a specifically from a social science perspective or an economic perspective, I'm also worried about data availability. A lot of the data, a lot of the empirical work that we are doing is with US data. First, because it's the biggest economy, but also because there are a lot of data sets that have been running for a long time, for decades, like the panel study of income dynamics. Also, where we in Europe nowadays, we have similar data sets, but they start much later. So we can't do everything, or all the kind of analysis you could do with US data. And there, obviously, we get worried first that there are maybe also strategic budget cuts that then affect the funding of these data sets. But also, you wonder, what about the quality of the data? Now the chief of the Bureau of Labor Statistics has been fired for just announcing job market data that wasn't favorable, seen as positive enough or not too negative by the Trump administration. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics manages a lot of these data sets. And so people also wonder, will they be continued? Will certain questions maybe be dropped? Will there be data manipulation if there is pressure on that? And that, I think, would be a real challenge for science, and something we don't really understand yet is how can we prevent that, and how can we support these data collection issues.
Right. So in our earlier conversation, you mentioned that there are even historical data and data from our German history that illustrate what a decline of science could mean for society. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, but I was alluding to the fact that there is quite a bit of research that analyzes the effects of the forced immigration of Jewish scientists from Germany during the Nazi regime. And what this research very clearly shows is that it had a negative effect on economic growth in Germany, and it had a positive effect of science in the US. So first, I mean, it's maybe not surprising, but what I think is surprising in a way, that there are very good papers that find that the loss of human capital based on this immigration of Jewish scientists had far more long negative consequences on economic growth than the loss of physical capital that we had due to war destruction. And then secondly, that the US science really profited from integrating these Jewish scientists who then became superstars. They created own fields, attracted other young people to these fields. So I think, there, a word of caution to the US, there's also something to be lost on their side. And
right.
Yeah, I don't know whether the Trump administration is interested in these kind of issues, but I think it is a real worry also for the US economy.
Right. That's an interesting insight on history-wise, so thank you for that. When we talk about future transatlantic relations in research and innovation, there are, I think, two aspects are central. On the one hand, the people, and on the other hand, the science and academic freedom. So on the people side, researchers, policymakers, science managers, or on the science side, collaborations, programs, and projects. As you mentioned, data, research data and databases. So, but let's start with the people. We were already there, I think. In Europe and Germany, there's an ongoing debate about attracting researchers from the US and abroad, international ones who no longer want to go to the United States, maybe. That's in the discussion. So what do you think about such programs as the Choose Europe initiative from the EU or the German Global Minds Initiative, or 1000 Köpfe Plus Programm, as we say in Germany? So what do you think about that?
So I would say, as an economist, I'm in favor of competition. So we have competition for the best scientists, and if another country is not taking the opportunities, why shouldn't we do that? So I know there are some people who think is it morally good now to attract young researchers or also established researchers to Europe? I don't really see that point, I have to say. First, these people are free to choose where to work, and if we can set up programs and take advantage of the situation, why not? And also, we are really helping science if we are supporting these individuals who can no longer or don't want to work longer in the US. So I think we should take this advantage, this opportunity as much as we can, to support the scientists and to support science in itself. And if that helps to stimulate economic growth in Europe and in Germany, that is certainly a very welcome side effect. And we just had this debate that we need more investment into science in any case in Europe. So in that sense, I think it's the more of these programs we have, maybe we can coordinate on a European level, that will probably be helpful, the better. And I'm not worried about brain drain per se when it comes from the country which is leading in science in any case.
It has enough money, for sure. So you even started a proposal, I think, with colleagues in March called the Meitner-Einstein program. Can you share some thoughts? What was your motivation back then?
The motivation, first was really just to give support to this idea, to set up a program where the details can be debated and have to be debated by the specific agencies. And I think it's great that we are also using the programs that we already have and that we know work well on the infrastructure and put more fund in it, or that the ERC has a special program to attract people. And right. I think that is exactly the right route to also just pull it off on a very short notice. But the idea was actually really why not? I think we should support these programs to support scientists who cannot longer work on their issues in the US, who do not feel comfortable doing it there. And I'm very happy that part of these ideas now get taken up both on the German level and on the European level.
Right. So we come to Mrs. Amian. You're responsible for implementing these Global Minds initiative at the Humboldt Foundation. So can you tell us a bit more about how specific the money is used at the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation?
Yes, I'll be happy to do that. But maybe before I do that, I want to stress that there is an immediate demand for these kinds of programs, especially for young generations of scientists.
Right.
Because we at the foundation are seeing an increase in fellowship applications by almost 20%. So there's an international demand of young people trying to find positions now that the US is losing ground as a market because there's less funding in the US. There's a redirection of interest into Europe. So I would say there's an immediate need, especially for the young generation. And then the question is, how do you frame these kinds of programs? Do you frame them as an opportunity and as a responsibility of European countries who have the funds to offer support in this situation for the international science community, making sure that this young generation isn't lost, but that these talented minds remain in the circulation of knowledge worldwide? Or do you frame it as we're trying to take advantage of a situation that a esteemed partner finds itself in right now? And the latter is something that we would say we shouldn't do, like pretend that we can benefit from the situation in the US. There's no one who can benefit if a big, successful science system runs into trouble. But it is important and maybe also a responsibility to say that we can step up in a very small way as a sign to show that we support the international research community in a situation where there's a need. And to come back to the Global Minds initiative, it is an initiative started by the government with the coalition agreement. And the idea, as you said, was there to step up in a way and strengthen Germany as a location where international researchers can come in a situation where there are limited opportunities. And we've started the initiative together with DFG. The Alexander von Humboldt Foundation is the partner. It's our role to fund international researchers and bring them into the German research system. And the DFG, of course, is the funder of general research in Germany. So together we offer programs. We extend our programs to offer support for international researchers.
These are programs that already exist, right?
Exactly. We're starting, this is all very agile, as we would say today, right? A process. We're starting with the existing programs. So at the Humboldt Foundation, with our Humboldt Research Fellowship Program, we were able to award about 60 more fellowships than otherwise we would have been able to do. And given the increase of applications, this is very important because we have excellent people who are there on our doorstep wanting to come to Germany, and we can provide the funding for them to do so. And we're still negotiating with the government about the 2026 budget and future years, since we also want to include new elements, both DFG and the Humboldt Foundation, to meet demands that are there. And there we're seeing that there is a demand for what has maybe now been called like something like shared professorships or programs where there's research money in Germany, but they don't require a full transition of international researchers to Germany. So we see that as a gap in the system right now and a demand that's there. And we're trying to work out solutions to make that possible. Because that's also an observation I have from our alumni. They all feel responsible for their institutions, for their students in the US. The number of US researchers on our doorstep saying, I want to leave the US right now, is not so high, against maybe expectations that some circles have. And that's due to responsibilities, feeling that I can't leave the ship now, I'm responsible. I'm in a position where I need to find creative solutions. And that's very much a sign of resilience in the US system, I would say, that's what researchers there think. And at the same time, they're in difficult positions and could very much benefit from support here in Germany and could bring their expertise and knowledge and excellence to our system, creating positions here, and then maybe in 4 to 5 years make a decision on whether they would actually transition or not. So that's something that we're working on. We can't really say yet how and what shape, but we think that's also important.
So good that you mention it, because that's, I think, beyond recruitment, right? It's more of a collaborative form. Ms. Fuchs-Schindel, what do you think about that? Like Ms. Amian mentioned part-time professorships. There are other measures that are in mind. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think also this is really an excellent idea to go that way. I mean, many US scientists or scientists in the US don't want to leave the US for good. I think for different reasons. Part is really feeling responsible for their university, wanting to fight where they are. Part is also that they still have very good research conditions, that they have this group of peers still. So I think it's we're going to see how this is going to develop over the next few years. But then offering them a bridge and saying you can have another home here in Europe or in Germany, and you can open a research group here, and that way I think we can also keep up this circulation of knowledge and provide some services to the US. Another thing that we are already doing, I think, very actively, and is to take over some initiatives that are not funded or not possible anymore in the US. So for example, just the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank had a very successful online series on climate economics, which was canceled almost immediately after the Trump administration took over. And then we brought it over to Europe, and we are running it now at the Center for Economic Policy Research here in Europe. So whatever we can do to support in that way, I think we should definitely do.
So that's a good point, to change from the people side to the corporations or collaborations. And then, because I think the bigger question is if some American institutions might no longer serve as a global hub for science or for such projects, who will take their place, and what does that mean for Europe?
I think it's hard to replace them, so we should be realistic there. It's just that we can think about what kind of infrastructures can we offer, what can we support, like these online seminars. That is an easy example, but data sets, for example, it's much harder. Also data repositories. To coordinate and think about how can we step in here, and maybe also to think ahead. I mean, what kind of things are threatened and where should we get active now? I think there I see really a role also for science policy to think that through more systematically. But it would be really hard if the almost attack on academic freedom continues to buffer that to the full extent.
Yeah, would maybe like some collaborations on a more subnational level helps? Like I know there's something between Baden-Württemberg and California and so on. So is that a solution?
I think it's a little bit this coalition of the willing almost, as you say, right? There are certainly some US states with whom it's easier. Right. And that can be done, but then a lot of the research funding in the US is on the national level, right? I know there have also been initiatives thought through in the US where whether the states, the democratic run states, or maybe also some Republican ones who are still in favor of full academic freedom could collaborate and kind of replace the system. But I think there's so much money involved in it, also with private donations, which play a huge role already in the academic system in the US. To really replace that is almost impossible, but we should still think about what can we do. For sure.
As we heard, you are responsible for North America, so I assume Canada as well, and Australia. So are there more collaborations and maybe stronger cooperations between these countries?
Yes, there are, and at the same time, they can't replace. I mean, if that's the word we're using, they cannot replace the breadth and the depth of the collaborations that exist with the US. So we can't predict the future. Of course, I would say there's a good chance that the US institutions will remain extremely important, visible, and attractive, but maybe there'll be a structural transformation, or there will be, as I would say, a structural transformation in the US system with less federal money going into the system. Mm-hmm. And so that will have long-term effects that we'll probably see in 5 to 10 years, and I think we need a long breath to be able to respond then, not just now and think about who might be my partner tomorrow, but to think about what will the impact be on the entire system. And no one can really replace, or if we look just at budget-wise, the amount of money that is lost from the US system.
It's enormous, right?
No one can really replace that. And it's, I would say, therefore, important to do whatever we can in very little pieces while still being humble and not thinking that we're actually replacing that. And what I heard most in my conversations is they're most worried about the next generations of researchers, since now less people are starting PhDs in the US. So this, in 5 years, will lead to fewer postdoc positions, and that will have an impact on the entire system. So we might have shrinking advancement of knowledge eventually, which is very sad for humankind, I would say. Say that the international research endeavor might not be as vibrant in 10 years as it was now. And anyone who can do anything to try to put little seeds into the ground to make them grow, I think should do that now. Yeah.
So Manuel Heitor requested for more funding this morning here in Hamburg. Mrs. Fuchs-Schindel, what do you think? To what extent could we step in for the US, and should we maybe step in for the US?
I think it's a very good time to invest into science. We need it anyhow. We need it for economic growth, and the fact that there is less funding for science in the US certainly increases the need for funding for science in Europe. At the same time, we know that we are not in easy times. I mean, many countries have budget issues, and not only Germany. In many European countries also we have movements that are not really as in the US, but that are not really supportive of academic freedom. So it's going to be tricky, but we should think about what we can do, definitely.
So I don't know if we have any American football fans here in the audience, but this should be a 2-minute warning, because in a moment we want to give you the opportunity to ask your questions or comment on these topics. But for now, there's the last point I want to stress with you both. So there's also the opportunity to have some learnings from the situation in the US. I think it is striking that the aggressiveness and speed of the governmental measures caught many institutions and universities pretty unprepared. So what do you think can we learn in Germany, like the politicians, but also the institutions like universities? What can we learn from this development in the USA?
I think we should think that there are different lines of things that come up there. First, we should think about how to make our structures really more resilient, so that if there is an attack on academic freedom, we are relatively well prepared. So that comes to the university, but also to research institutes. And I think that also demands for willingness of the current government to say, I mean, how can we change structures, maybe thinking ahead to build up some barriers of protection. And I don't think we are quite there yet, this realization that might be something we should be thinking of, and that would be something that I would hope the current government also takes up more. Secondly, I think we as scientists and also as science institutions, we should think more about how can we create friends of science in society, so to talk about the benefits. This morning we heard about spin-offs and that come out of the ERC, and to kind of showcase these success stories. So for example, if you go to Harvard's webpage nowadays, it looks completely different than it used to look
when it looked
one year ago, right? So now it's all about what does our research bring for society? And so really, that has always been important, but it's now more important than ever that we keep up this debate with society, and also say, I mean, what do we really provide? What are the benefits? Why is this public money well spent if we spend it on the science system?
Yeah.
And then in terms of academic freedom, also to think about how can we defend that as good as possible,
right,
even if there were more attack coming. So I think we should prepare much more actively for these.
In our earlier conversation, you mentioned a little theory of yours that the institutions are too used to competition in the system. So to speak with one voice. Isn't that the same in Germany and Europe? Like they compete for funding, excellence strategy, or Horizon Europe and something? Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that was my hypothesis that that their institutions have to be aware that there's a point when you switch from competition to solidarity or to some kind of joint effort. And maybe that's something that we can learn from the US, that you think about when the right point is to do that. Competition is great, and I think it drives research and drives science, so it needs to stay there. And at the same time, making sure that where there are joint interests of a community of institutions and the research system, that you're also able to stand up with one voice. And
how can we strengthen that?
In a personal conversation with an alumnus, I asked that question. He said it's important to be aware of the core mission of the institution and have that process ready when there's an attack, so that the people who are actually meant to be behind you are certainly behind you in that situation, and that you don't start at that point to discuss on who you are and what you're there for. I found that very interesting. So to say, be aware of your core mission, your values, and then stand up for them and find friends who will stand up with you. So don't just focus on the attacker and try to think about your own mission from that perspective, but also look at the people who you expect to be behind you, which they will be, but it also is not effortless to do that. So that standing up together requires a lot of processes of finding common ground. It's not just there. So I found that an interesting advice. But then also, that's maybe the US pragmatist optimist perspective, then to say that institutions are strong and they survive attacks, they can endure. So don't be too afraid, but be bold to
stay optimistic.
Stay up and your core values.
So that's a good last word for now. Thank you for the informative discussion so far. Now we come to your questions. I see here this gentleman in front. I think he needs a microphone. Yeah, he's here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Helmut Dosch from Hamburg, here from DAISY. So first of all, I wanted to thank you for all the initiatives you do. I think that's absolutely appreciated. The Meitner-Einstein program and also the Global Mind Initiative. I think that's enormously important. But Katrin said something at the very end which goes a little bit in my direction. So other than, I am much less optimistic that maybe what the future is in the United States. So what we see is, and one has to really speak it out. We have here people in power who have an ideology which is anti-science and is anti-facts, and it's for conspiracy and all that. So Vance already said a year ago, the university professor is our enemy.
Right.
So so we have to speak it out clearly what we are facing here. So we see now 8 months of these people setting an anti-science and anti-fact agenda through. And we already see this enormous damage they are doing. I'm not optimistic that we have 3.5 more years in front of us. But I'm even not optimistic that after, when Trump leaves, Trump is, let's put it politely, a very simple person. But he has his ideological spin doctors behind him, right, who tell him what to say, and he sometimes repeats, and with his typical speech, what he wants to transport. So all I'm saying is, we see here, and everybody who has a clear mind sees that there is a huge Western continent, which has been the rock of democratic system and the rock of scientific excellence, going to hell right? And so after 4 years, so even though there will be replaced, the damage is so irreversible that it takes 20 years or longer to restore.
That's a good point.
Restore all that. But let me make my real point is the following.
Sure.
We are, all of us are observing that, and and it's essentially silence. That US has silence, you know exactly why. You keep your heads down and not off, because then you are cut. So you are worried about that. But the rest of the world, of the democratic world, and the scientists in the remaining world in Europe and elsewhere,
right.
we are making these programs, and this is fine. But let me put it that way. This would not prevent the disaster. So I don't know what to do, but I think we should not stay quiet. We must organize a voice of a world voice of scientists making every day, every week, loud protesting against this development.
Thank you so much. This reminds me on what Manuel Heitoro said this morning about science activism, right? Maybe you want to respond to that. Is there more need for science activism? And as you mentioned before, is it reversible? Is there the chance to have a new start in the US? What do you think about that?
I think everything is reversible in a sense, but it might still be that you have very long-term effects, that it takes decades. So, and also I think I wouldn't say we cannot take as a measure of success that the universities survive. I mean, that's a very low bar, I would say. So clearly there is damage, and there's lasting damage to science. And I think we have to face it. And as you were saying, there's the cuts to PhD programs now. They are dramatic. I mean, even I just talked to a colleague from the Harvard Economics Department. Even there, they have the incoming PhD cohort. And these things, they will have lasting effects. And I agree, we have to think we have to collude more, in a sense, to think about how we react. Also in the US, a strategy to say, oh yeah, I'm glad my university is not yet targeted, and then I stay silent. I think that just benefits the Trump administration, and it just shows everyone was unprepared by how fast the administration went on attack against science and also in other areas. And internationally, we were just as stunned. But we have to, the more we can join forces in Europe and with Australia, Canada, and so on, the better.
Yes, I can only agree. I mean, you can paint a very grim picture, as you just did, because it's a very dangerous phenomenon that we're seeing as an international populist right-wing anti-science movement, and that's very dangerous. And so I think there's reason to stand up, and at the same time, these are larger challenges of our societies and the way in which our societies work. I think in the US, there's a real culture of fear because in social media, there's a lot of violence that's been transported to the ground, so people are afraid to speak up because then someone will be at their door, and it's actually really a threat. And that's something we're seeing in Europe as well, which is not as bad perhaps yet, but something to keep in mind. It's in a way beyond the research community to solve these issues because they're so big. But it's a challenge that maybe creates more complexity to this impetus to stand up and say something, because the sphere of communication is very complicated in these days. That would maybe be my response.
Thank you so much. So we have the chance for one more question, I think, because Mrs. Fuchs-Schindel has to leave for a train, right? So please keep it short, and yeah.
Sure. Hi, Erika Liliaten from Fraunhofer IMWS in Halle, but live in Hamburg and spent many years at TUHH and Humboldt Center in Geesthacht. I came over as a Humboldt Fellow, 2004. I have various perspectives on the situation with the US, but my point is a little bit different in terms of science and scientists. This is a global issue, commodity resource, right? And obviously, the role that the US has played and will continue to play is critical. But I think that we need to take this opportunity and the challenge very seriously, in particular as Europe. This time around, the challenge should have been expected a bit, that we didn't react, I would say, 8 years ago during the first term. That our attractiveness, it's huge, especially in Germany, but continuing thinking about the European Union, the research landscape that we have. I would say in comparison to the US, we need to be better at self-promotion, yeah? And where we sort of rally for science globally, regardless of the US. I am not trying to say that they're not important, that we can't, address things. I think complaining about what's going on in the US and fighting the good fight isn't going to do anything to the Trump. They're not listening to their own citizens, right? But really taking a global viewpoint, US is part of it, and I know this roundtable is about transatlantic, but I think to influence the transatlantic relationship, really recognizing that it's a global responsibility and there are great opportunities if we would get ourselves together, self-promote positively, and be attractive.
Could we do better marketing in Germany?
Definitely, I think we have a lot to offer, exactly. We have academic freedom, we have great structures, we have very good universities, and many of them, we don't have these very much elite, but we have a very strong foundation, we have very good research institutes in the different kind of dimensions, more practical, more theoretical, so definitely we should advertise it.
Okay. So I think we stop here. Thank you very much to our two distinguished panelists and to you, our audience, for your engagement. I wish you a wonderful day and enjoy the many exciting insights during the rest of the program. Goodbye.